Aufzeichnen. So, Tim, it is my great...
I have to say, okay, yes, here we go.
Okay, great. It is my great pleasure to meet you today. And we will be talking about a great many things because your interests and your activities span more than many of my other interview partners. So my first potentially very big question is, what do you do, Tim, and what are you up to in life?
So from the outside, I'm sitting in a beautiful village on the Swiss countryside, walk with my dogs every day, and spend a lot of time typing furiously into my computer. So if you don't pay more attention, then that's just me. At the moment, there isn't much more to my life. But what I do in my computer is discussing the nuts and bolts of the climate transformation, especially the International Climate Cooperation under Paris, and from a digitalization angle, to be precise.
So that's your day-to-day job in a way, right? That you work in climate change. But the way I actually found you was because you have also written a book. You wrote a wonderful science fiction called Liquid Rain. And perhaps you can summarize in a nutshell, and as far as that is possible, what is this book about?
So maybe to start with, I started writing because my wife told me you have to write your stuff down. And she was thinking of more a academic book or a Sachbuch. But I ended up writing science fiction instead because, again, as you said, I'm having a lot of interests. And once you are through that barrier, okay, we can actually digitalize all these things that we're currently doing with money law and accounting, for example, or voting, and all that can be in a computer and is then programmable, changeable, adjustable. There's a lot of options, and they are also affecting literally every aspect of our lives. So Liquid Rain is taking a, well, kind of world-building centered approach to fiction. So the main story is really quite simple. It's just a man waking up from coma and just rediscovering the world after a long slumber. So being very curious, asking a lot of questions, traveling to find a loved one, trying to keep it not too complex. But the book really is about how every chapter is working through a aspect of everyday life and reimagining that in a open, free digital democracy. So I've also been very optimistic, I must say, and then write about, for example, how to fund art in urban spaces or how to consent to the family relations in such a world where you don't have to go to a lawyer and to an office and stamp and do all these things to adopt somebody, but you actually focus on the adoption working and everybody being happy about it. So yeah, and that goes through a lot of topics and yeah, embedded in a science fiction environment.
Well, one thing that I really appreciated about the book is it's this endless rabbit hole of information, because one thing you've done is at the end of every chapter, you have a nearly endless link list that ties back to white papers, to research, to associations, anybody who's already doing work in that area, in that arena, who already has produced results. So for anybody who maybe, initially comes in with this, well, I don't think that would be possible because it's only 35 years in the future, correct?
Yeah, 51 is my landing year.
So it's not that far into the future. And sometimes I sat there and I was like, well, I don't know, that sounds like a wild development. But then when you begin to look at some of the research that you have gathered, you begin to realize that might actually be possible, right?
Yeah. So I'm an academic at heart, so I do like to cite my sources all the time. And I figured that also in a modern day, you cite your sources by linking them, which unfortunately not all of the links still work. It's from 2016 and the internet changes rapidly. So next time I think I would download them, put them on my personal website and link them there. But, yes, so this was really important to me to remain realistic. And there are very few and also I had a few where technology is so advanced that it's indistinguishable from magic moments in the book, but I tried to keep them not narratively relevant. So you don't actually need the quantum supercomputed AI for the story to run. And that's just, oh, this is a direction this could develop into, but it's not like current day AIs could almost do what I'm describing there. So the idea of having a personalized assistant that's just your and only knows you and is not leaking information to anybody else, but has all your memories and emails and contacts sorted. So
well, that is one of the smaller ideas I found in there, right? But but I just read in another science fiction, you had a lot of Clarkian moments with magic in the most Clarkian sense, right? So I had many of those moments in there. You know, and again, you touch on a great number of really, really interesting topics, but I would say just a few of the big topics that stood out for me in your book were about climate change and the evolution of democracy and our financial systems. And when I was reading your ideas, along those lines, I thought, gosh, there's so many practical solutions out there already or in the making. And I'm wondering if you can say anything about which role do you believe has inner work, personality development for getting these ideas finally realized? Or, you know, if I were to express it in a different way, what in our individual psyche might keep us from doing what needs to be done and that could already be done?
So I think I want to disentangle that question in two parts. That's on the one side, climate change, on the other side, our social organization. I mean, they are interlinked, but for climate change, it is quite clear what needs to be done. On the social organization, there's a wide open field, and I don't know what is to be done. Even in Liquid Rain, I described that the main character is traveling a lot, so we can describe many different variations of similar systems, right? Because there's a base design space there. So, but let me start with climate change instead. So, one thing is, it is overwhelming, and one step is to acknowledge that yes, it's way too late. Yes, it's already really bad. And I understand totally if you think, what can I do? And are completely overwhelmed. And none of this can be done alone, basically. I mean, of course, you can adjust some parts of your lifestyle, but without acting coordinated as a community, it's not going to help. It's not going to get us anywhere. Like, I think it's a mistake to think that consumer power is actual power. So that's a big one, that you don't do this alone, this journey, especially not climate change. But when it comes to the inner life of one person, so the deeper you get into climate change, the darker it gets, and it gets very dark very quick if you start using these frames. So there's a lot of psychological resilience that it takes just to live with effects. So me turning on the hot water in my shower is also me pulling the trigger of an atmospheric weapon of mass destruction. And that weapon of mass destruction is devastating. And it's so devastating that, it will permanently shift global human demographics.
Before you go on there, can you say just a few more words about why me putting on the hot shower is a button of mass destruction? That may not be clear for everybody.
So my shower is running on fossil gas in the basement. So every time I turn it on, I burn more fossil gas and contribute to the climate catastrophe. And I call it a weapon of mass destruction. But the one that's easiest to understand is sea level rise, because just a third or so of human population lives in areas that will be underwater by the end of the century. And just forcing such mass migrations always leads to mass suffering. The other part is there are parts of the planet around the equator, especially, where you get heat, wet bulb 35 events, we call them. So it's basically temperature and humidity that if a human goes out unprotected is dead within 10 minutes. And a lot of people don't have protection. So it's in the first chapter of The Ministry of the Future that describes one of these heat wave events. And if you look at the high scenarios in the IPCC, like the 3-degree scenario, the 4-degree scenario, literally billions of people will be exposed to such conditions. And it's all black and brown people, basically, because white people tend to live in areas that don't cross that threshold, at least not in the near future. So that I realized that at some point there's a strong correlation between organicists and white supremacists and climate denial, respectively, not even climate denial, but pushing to exacerbate the climate catastrophe. And at that point, it sometimes made click, oh, it's actually a weapon of mass destruction. So just living with that realization and being part of that weapon is really tough. And so there's this quote that Greta Thunberg in one of her speeches said, if you really understood the situation and still kept on failing to act, then you would be evil. And I refuse to believe. So, and I think to some degree she's naive in her refusal to believe that, because yes, there is some evil in the world. There always has been some evil in the world. And right now that evil is pushing more climate catastrophe. Not everybody, of course, but it does exist and this evil is there. And it's very hard to face because it's so everywhere. So this painful moral and ethical conclusions are really hard to deal with. So typically people either repress the knowledge, become extremely cynical or radical. So there is this German intellectual Tassio Müller who uses the term Verdrängungsgesellschaft to diagnose the current situation. So most people just, yes, we know that, but we repress it, and everything that reminds us of it will be even more violently suppressed. So people start punching activists just because they remind them, hey, by the way, we have a problem. So in other words, there's a lot of inner work to do, especially facing that repression and also not being like just being punched in the face by it and becoming cynical or giving up in that moment. And I absolutely include myself in that. I do have days where I just get punched in the face by the facts and I'm not able to do anything about it. And that's even though I work in climate change, right? I work for governments, international institutions for climate change, but what I do is I sit in my computer and I type procurement documents or something. And that very quickly also feels like this bullshit job. So there's a category that David Graeber calls the box ticker. So that's an employee who exists only or primarily to allow an organization to be able to claim it is doing something that in fact it is not doing. And for a lot of white-collar climate jobs, that's just what we do. We just help to pretend we are caring about climate, but actual climate action is not happening. So with those words said, I think on climate change, we have to be very strategic, ruthless to some degree, because the people we are facing there is actual evil in there. Like when you're dealing with the oil industry, you know that there is institutional embedded, I don't even want to call it people, but it's information structures that lead to these results that are absolutely deadly and devastating for our planet, and especially for Black and brown people in the global South. So accepting that fact is hard, but we have to accept it, I think. There's no way around it. And I also strongly believe that the vast majority of people recognizes that evil when they see it. It's just very hard to face. Probably the biggest on inner work.
Well, and it's also, to quote Hannah Arendt, right, the banality of evil, because it's not necessarily that all evil is intentional wrongdoing. A lot of evil is a lack of engagement, and that's something that I certainly feel in myself, right? To notice that in me, the complacency, the in combination with the overwhelm and the not knowing where to start.
Yeah, and I think that's a nice link to the views on finance and democracy, actually, because there I also don't know where to start, because it's just there's so many options. Right? I mean, we could do so many things so differently. It's this idea of a Turing complete design space. I usually like to call it, where anything you can do in a video game could be legal. Right? We could just say, we have an argument between neighbors, let's play Doom and decide in a deathmatch who wins, and then I get to build the fence or you get to build it. Like anything we could possibly think of in a computer could have real world consequences. So there is a lot of options. And I think, to me, it was only like a couple of months ago, honestly, it was in the winter break, yes, when I read Graeber's last work, the history, the dawn of everything, where he has this lens where he's not asking, okay, origins of inequality, why is the legal system so punishing for poor people and so lenient on rich people? No, he's asking, how did we get so stuck? So we have all this history of diversity, of so many variants of social relations. But today we have these few pillars that just are there, and we are always thinking within these pillars. So the rule of law, for example, is it non-negotiable? Is illegal always bad? And then why do we look to the history of atrocities on the planet? Most of them were legal. Most of them were properly accounted for. It was the pirates who freed the slaves who were the criminals. It was the helpers who helped people escape the concentration camps who broke the law. And still we are having these imperial tools so deep embedded that our only go-to point when we say we have to change something, oh, let's change the law.
Right.
So that makes it really tough, because even in liquid rain, I'm still thinking in legal terms, right? There are a lot of liquid rain deals a bit, how do we decide on the rules that we all follow? And I'm barely touching okay, what do we do if somebody doesn't follow the rules? So that's this threat of violence behind the door, that when you free the slaves, for example, then the imperial army will target you. So we are still living in that tension between knowing that the power structures are capable of all this evil and still accepting them as our main tools. So I think just now we have in Germany that interesting situation between Fridays and Future and the Last Generation, between a more radical, more like, yes, we want to change the law, but please now, versus we want to change the law and we first want the majority to agree on it. And so this tension is very present in our collective dealing with the climate. And there's always the fear, of course, of people who say, okay, actually, this entire system is not working and we can go completely illegal and rogue, which so far hasn't happened, but could happen any moment. And it probably did already happen in the digital world. So,
yeah. I mean, one of the things that fascinated me, frankly, in Liquid Rain was your reimagining, well, you're probably not the only one, but your description of how a liquid democracy could look like, and how, for example, one of the problems that I certainly feel I am facing as a citizen is that information has become so complex on so many different fronts that I feel I cannot possibly make the right choice anymore, because half of the time I don't even know if the information I'm being fed is reliable, right? So if you could say maybe a few words about some of the solutions that you thought up or described in the book, that would be fantastic.
So it's a funny thing about digitalization, and especially if you observe or read anthropological works more rather on hackers and IT professionals, that the personal face-to-face relationship is fundamental and key, and is the only thing they ever trust. So basically the two of us would have to meet and exchange our private keys, and only then we have a trust relationship. Before that, I don't know if you're a deepfake managed by somebody, right? So this is the one thing, like trust in online information will break down, and it's already breaking down, and it will only get worse with time. At the same time, the online information reveals that our television and newspaper channels were just as full of fakes as the online information is now. So it kind of throws us back to the human-to-human, face-to-face situation. And there is one thing I think that Claire says that at some point, that she finds it's extremely difficult to represent somebody if she doesn't know the name of the person she's representing. So the idea is that nobody should represent 10 million people. That's not viable. You can only represent people you know, but you can have chains. So let's say, I don't know, I know a friend of mine who is in psychiatric care, and I think she is really good at what she does. She really understands the needs of her patients. So I don't have to understand psychiatric care. I can just say she can make the decisions, because I can't assess if the information is true or not, but she can. So I don't even want to vote on any of these topics. I would want her to make the decision for me. So it's the idea of that pass through to people you personally trust, and who also know what you stand for and where you ethically stand and understand you, so that only such people can represent me.
She in turn then invests in her voices in somebody who knows more about
exactly.
anything else related to the subject matter.
So she is busy actually working in care, so she wouldn't be a politician, but she can judge the politics of other people based on the experience in care, which I couldn't. So, so I wouldn't think her being actually in the, and also you can't have a good conversation with more than 5 or 10 people in the room. So that's another one. I really disagree with the whole book-chin-esque, everything has to be handled in the public assembly where everybody is present and everybody has to agree. Because that just takes too much time. And coming from climate change, time is the one thing we don't have. So groups of, let's say, 3 to 10 people are a good group size to actually find a compromise. So yeah, so this continued like delegation is important and representation is very important. It's just, well, there is also one other change. So currently we have representation for areas, and that comes from a time when area was a relevant descriptor of who that people are who live there. Nowadays, try to represent Kreuzberg. Like, who do you represent? There's so many different interests in that area, right? It's, so a representation that's more focused on people and people's interests and fixed like geographical areas where you're registered your home, I think would also be one of the critical parts of it, at least.
Yeah. So at any rate, that was a really mind-blowing concept for me, right? How that could be reorganized and how elegant such a system would be and how much more relevance and trust it would create for me in the structures that are going to make bigger decisions that affect a great number of people. Yeah.
Maybe one last thing on that. It's also something I like to see very visually. So I kind of like to imagine the social graph as a actual graph, as 3-dimensional thingy with nodes being people and lines go between them that represent connections of trust. And then you can kind of visualize flows in different colors that flow through different people and then zoom out and you see the aggregate, how you get these, like Claire, I think represents like 300 million people in the book, right? But only for this one topic that she's a specialist in. So you can see how through trusted connections, all that flows together to a few nodes who then can find a compromise that everybody's okay with.
Yeah. So again, for me, that was really incredible to see that and to hear you visualize it actually helps. Now, I want to shift a little bit because one of the things that touched me when I met you personally is that I realized you're not just one of those box tickers, as you called them, because you're not just writing about these topics, you're not working in that area professionally, but you actually started your own project in the realm of climate change. So tell us something about that.
Yeah, so we are going to my happy place. This is the only thing I like to talk about even more than liquid rain. So maybe I start historically. So it was in 2016, I came to this workshop in Kampala, working for a UN organization supposed to give a workshop on access to climate finance. And on the sidelines of that workshop, a woman from the Ministry of Energy approached me, asked me to help her with a review and application to a German donor, the NAMA facility. And I knew them quite well. I've been doing bullshit jobs for them. So I knew all the objective criteria that they use to pick projects. And this was about green schools in Uganda. So it was basically if you visit a school kitchen, especially in Uganda, it's just 3 stones on the fire. And that's all there is. Also, most of them don't have electricity at all. So basically the ask was very simple technology, just move from 3 stones to a proper oven. Even if it's just, bricks and tiles, it still saves 80% of the wood and smoke, and it's much more comfortable and so on. And basic electricity just for lights, maybe a 200-watt solar panel. So very simple, low tech, but scaling it to the entire country. And so German government gave them another 200,000 euro for more white collar work, working on the documents, and then in summer 2019 rejected the entire project. So yeah, that got me very upset when I heard that, and also somewhat angry. But the timing was just like, with my own biography, my parents had sold my childhood home in the same summer, so I had some disposable cash that I wasn't quite sure what to do with. And so being angry and upset about this, I just went on Twitter and searched climate activist Uganda enter and started chatting with a few, and then found one that I think thought was very serious about climate change and also quite knowledgeable. So I asked that person if she would like to do a little project together, and asked her to visit a school, take some pictures, confirming that the school indeed had a 3-stone fireplace. Asked her to get a quote from a stove maker that was also identified, like the Ugandan government really did their homework. So they had like the enterprises identified that can actually build these stoves and stuff. Like we had a lot of preparatory information there. And so the next step was like, yes, the school is here, here's the quote. And then it took 3,000 euros to get it actually done. So, and in my bank account, sent 3,000 euros to a person I never met in Uganda. By now, Vanessa Nakate has grown that project into, I think, 45 schools. They're installing as we speak. And it continues to grow, and she has a whole team working on the ground in Uganda now doing that. And on the European team side, we teamed up with Nadia Alter and her team. So she's a user experience designer and collective intelligence expert. And our goal is to basically use that interaction that I had with Vanessa to streamline that, so that you can find activists and you can make this series of small interactions that over time build up trust and make it really, really easy for the activists on the ground. So our uniqueness comes from always taking the eye from the person on the ground who says, hey, I want to do action on climate change. What can I do? Find the app in the phone, find something you can do, get the advice you need, get the funding that you need all in one place, and never have to, register a company, never have to deliver receipts for your accounts, never have to, write up in English in a 10-page document that follows a certain structure what you're actually doing. Because all these are skills that local activists don't have. And it took Vanessa 3 years to set up a foundation, basically, just because, the Ugandan government didn't want her to have a foundation for that long, I guess, or because they're slow, I don't know. So the idea is really that you can actually do without. So also linking back to what I said before, like accounting itself is not necessarily needed. What you need is accountability. And we have a video or several videos actually for every euro we spend. So in a way, I have more accountability than most projects that are recognized by international climate finance. But I don't have any receipts at the same time. We're just saying, hey, we are paying you for the video. You deliver the video, we pay you this. That's all we need. I don't even need to know how much you spent on your taxi and whatever. So yeah, this is a big paradigm shift in how to approach climate finance, obviously.
Yeah, I think that is huge. And it was, one of the most inspiring stories that I've heard in a long while, and how you approach this and how you, in a way, also made come real what you describe in Liquid Rain, right? Where the connecting point is the relationship that you build with one person, the trust that you build with one person, and then just assuming if she has the same values as you, why in the world would she not take the money and do what she said she wanted to do? Yeah, fantastic. You just told me that just before we started our call, you're expecting a very important letter. What is that letter?
Yeah. So basically, if you allow me to switch into startup speech for a second here. So I'm thinking of the process with Vanessa basically as the first trial mock-up of the procedures. And it was incredibly successful, just by the fact that it was Vanessa of all people. But it also is hard to say we can scale that and we can repeat that, because you can only have so many internationally famous climate activists on the global stage. So it was important to us to repeat with just some student that we hire off a university who is not not already understanding climate change, but not being a visible and loud active climate activist. So that was one goal. The other goal was just to repeat it and learn from all these things that went wrong the first time or that were complicated and difficult, and do them a little better. And also to develop an app to potentially scale it really. So we did that in Ghana. We choose Ghana because it has a bilateral agreement with the Swiss government that I negotiated with Ghana back in the day when I worked for the Swiss government. And there is a potential to get real money out of it. So And in Uganda, I don't have that agreement, so it's much more difficult to access institutional funding. Also, Vanessa is very good at accessing funding, so I don't think she needs my help there anymore. So yeah, and the letter now is the letter from the Environmental Protection Agency from Ghana. That's basically a letter of endorsement of our approach and of the school kitchen projects that we are suggesting there. So with that, I hope we can actually make this even a profitable investment in the end.
Fantastic. So fingers are crossed that the letter will be arriving any moment now. One other detail that I thought was really endearing is that when you told me about Vanessa and the project, you also told me about your decision to pay Vanessa a per diem of 350 euro, which is compared to sort of the normal standard daily rate that would be common in Uganda and perhaps in many other Western countries in Africa, would be 10 euros, right? Why did you make that decision?
It's an interesting one, and that got me a lot of discussions. So, and also people with whom I discuss this get very emotional about it. So I would hear things like, you just bought her off, and she didn't really have much of a choice with that offer. And I did have local helpers in sub-Saharan Africa before, so in my PhD in Kenya, and I paid them 10 euros a day or 15 euros for the supervisor of the team. And it felt really bad as well. And so I figured I need to use a different number, but which number? And what is a good number? So I took two things that I know for sure. One is my own minimum that I would accept for a day of work. Even as a graduate fresh out of school, Switzerland 300 feels about right. But then I also, in one of my other jobs, saw it was a budget from one UN organization to another, and it featured budget lines for the really underpaid research assistants. And a research assistant would cost that much in the internal accounting. So I figured that's a good minimum wage. And so in the discussion, you usually say, oh, but they can make less because the cost of living is lower. In my head, I have a hard time telling the difference between cost of living and value of life. And I totally refuse to accept that as an argument. So the cost of living here is high because we have great hospitals, we have energy infrastructure, we have public transport infrastructure, all these things that make Switzerland such a pleasant place to live are costly. And so the cost of living is actually, because we live longer, we live healthier. That's why our cost of living is higher. And I do not want my Ugandan activists to live shorter and miserable lives. So yeah, so I take a relatively hard stance on always paying internationally acceptable salaries, even if people are not internationally active.
Yeah, I mean, for me,
I even got emotional in that very moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite an outstanding choice that you made. That I think if more people would endorse that perspective, just on a side note, I remember having a conversation with somebody. I went to a training program where they trained you how to be an influencer, and this guy is basically a multimillionaire from well, it doesn't even matter from where he is, but he has a lot of money. And as he was on stage, he very proudly told us that his assistant, who's this brilliant woman, works for him for £12 an hour. And as he was sharing that story, I sat there and I was like, I was literally thinking, what the hell is wrong with you? How is that a point of pride that you pay somebody something that nobody in the UK can possibly live off with any form of dignity, unless they have somebody else who supports them in their life, and even then it would be wrong. And why, is it not a point of pride that if we are in a position, because we have more money, to also share more of that wealth with the people around us, right? But so that's a very different mindset that you come in with.
Absolutely, yeah. It's also, just as a side note, in the meantime, Vanessa is funded by 2 international foundations, and they had to create a budget and they have to adjust the day rates down. So yeah.
Okay, well, but still, I think this personal choice in that, which brings us maybe to also my next question about personal choice and personal influence, because I know many of us, including myself, feel so overwhelmed when confronted with all of these daunting issues that we already touched upon, that we're facing today. What do you feel we can do how can we affect anything when we feel so overwhelmed, when we feel like we are actually disempowered in all of this? What would be your suggestion based on your own experiences, but also on the research that you've done?
So one thing is, people will feel disempowered just by the size of the problem, even if you have quite a lot of power. So if you feel disempowered, but you have €1 million in your account, a Western passport, family real estate, I have news for you, you're not disempowered. You can do a lot from where you stand. But if you're living off Social Security and barely have enough food by the end of the month, you are actually disempowered, and there's very little you can do by yourself. And the only thing you can do is collective. And it's to team up with others, form crews. Bildet Banden is the German variation of that.
Hang up.
And it's so one thing that's important about that, though, is that building small crews or Banden, don't just bond with people like you. So your power level is really directly dependent on how intersectionally diverse your crew is. So that team that we're having with Vanessa and Nadia, I think, is so powerful because we are so different and still focus on working on the same issues and still have this shared ethics that binds us together. So yeah, I think key is find some people who are different than you and facing the same problems to cooperate with. That's really the most important advice I can give there.
And another piece in the future, maybe the app that you're building, right?
Yeah, that might help you find these people and cooperate with them directly. Yes.
Great. When is that going to be done?
Depends. I mean, we're looking for funding. And it's also so the app doesn't really do anything that you couldn't do on WhatsApp. It's really the key is the processes and how you approach it. And like this ping pong of videos, money, technical advice, having a third person also watch the video, make sure this all works, and then slowly start rolling. So it's the app itself will make it easy, sure. It will also, I hope it will also work as a flashpoint where, Vanessa can send private invites to her friends. So we have a trusted core group in the beginning that are, UNFCCC youth ambassadors, the voices of the youth that are sent to the COPs by their countries and so on. So if you have this core group, I think that will also help to create a dense network of people who really care. Yeah, but I think the important one is just find that person for you and start working with them. Yeah.
And if somebody were to do that, what do you think is the effect this has on individual well-being and mental health? Which effect did it have on you?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I was really tipping on the edge in my government job, the last one, which was kind of the diametral opposite of the work with Vanessa. So I was in a building with only white people, basically, speaking very national language and being very deeply embedded in this Swiss machine of how things are supposed to work that has like hard borders on the outside. And of course, we would talk to Ghana in a diplomatic setting, but we wouldn't make a decision and consult Ghana in that decision and take their perspective into account. No, we meet as a group of white people, make a decision, and then communicate that decision to Ghana. And so this was really, I mean, I was kind of on the edge towards the end there. And so it's like one of the things that really gets me out of my more troublesome areas in my psychology is whenever I get a message, hey, we're installing another school. Look at this stove. Oh, here we go. Still, reality is still there. We are still doing this. This whole feeling of I'm just sitting on my computer and nothing changes no matter what I do, that is broken. That spell, that feeling trapped, like I'm working like mad on climate change and nothing happens. That feeling has vanished since I've been working with activists directly. Probably the biggest one for me.
Yeah, well, it really sounds as if some of the disempowerment goes by simply taking the first step, beginning to do something that moves into the direction of the desired, well, brings us back to the infamous Gandhi quote, right? Be the change you want to see in the world. There's really something quite true about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's not going to change if you don't. So
yeah. And Tim, maybe as a last question to also expand this a bit to organizations, right? Because that is part of our readership, viewership as well. What do you feel an organization could do, or at least enable in their employees that they can do something to support more of a ground roots sort of activism? And how might that help even the organizational culture if they were to invest time and resources into such an endeavor?
So, I mean, organization is a big word, so I'll probably make a few assumptions here right now. So one is, first, so one important one is to check if there is an existing frontline community that you have some relation with. That's usually a very good starting point. In my case, it was the Ugandan schools, because I spoke to the Ministry of Energy once, right? It's kind of a weak connection, but the connection was there to some degree. And most organizations have like their supply chain somewhere, or they already supported somebody somewhere. So finding a community that you have some kind of relation is important. And then the idea, in my view, so if I was now in a consulting role in that process, so the idea would be to also find the budgets in your organizations that you already have, like buying your carbon offsets, maybe donating to some large international NGO. And instead of giving that to a third party that then does something good with it, give it to your employees and say, okay, this is your money now, but you have to spend it on activists on the ground. So you get to decide which activist gets funding to do what. And it's always a journey. It's always complicated. It's always difficult, because there's all the cross-cultural issues that come up. There's all the, like, there will be a lot of negotiations of what do we actually want to do with that money. But that's so much more empowering than to just, oh, somebody built a wind farm in India, let's send them some money for carbon offsets. That, yeah, the relation is way different. And I think it also, it also creates that workflow of accountability where you're not so much focusing on getting all your receipts for everything you spend, but getting these verifiable results. So these videos in our case, so for me, it made me, it's really difficult for me to do traditional accounting, because I'm just like, why don't you just pay for the result when it's there? Why do I need to do anything else? And so I think that can also unlock huge efficiencies internally once you get into that mood. Like, you don't even need to know all the details as long as the final result is good. And the final result, you can just look at it and see if it's good. So it's actually much less complicated than you would think. It's tricky to say what kind of culture that brings. So it can also lead to people just rejecting to be box tickers anymore and just insist on real physical action. So that's what it did to me. Like, I just can't accept the consulting assignment if there's no real world implementation attached to it. Basically, I don't want to do that anymore. So it can also help to focus your thinking on, oh, we have to fulfill this reporting requirement, but we have to actually do the thing, and the reporting is secondary. It's still there, of course. You can report it, you can create like video summaries and so on, but focus is always the action comes first, everything else comes secondary. So that can be a huge shift for any kind of organization, I think.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it would be. So there's something about not having KPIs in a way trump the actual result, and that they can be useful in some instances, but I found they're quite the holy cow in many systems, and to move into a culture of tangible results.
Yeah.
Tim, is there anything else that you would like to share that I haven't asked that you feel is essential to understand you and your work?
So this is maybe more related to your work than to mine, but the role of money in this whole setup is also very curious. And so this is something I've rarely spoken about so far, but it comes from my institutional work, where It's Paris Agreement, Article 6 of the Paris Agreement especially, that establishes this unit of accounting that's not like mitigation outcomes somehow. So it's like a reinvention of the carbon credit, but it's radically different from what carbon credits used to be, in the sense that it's like there's a total cap that you can't just issue an infinite amount of credits anymore. So every country has that cap, and there's a limited amount of these credits. So criterion 1 for a currency is fulfilled, right? You have a limited amount, and it's a digital unit that you can transfer around. You can use it in country, you can use it between countries. So ITMOs is the name of the new carbon credit, have a lot of properties of money. They differ from old money in the sense that, so dollars are basically, so the distribution of dollars on the planet is basically proportional to historic CO2 footprints. And the ability to sell ITMOs depends on an international diplomatic relation that says, yeah, your country didn't have a lot of emissions in the past and you're doing good on climate change, so you're allowed to sell, basically. So it's kind of the inverse of the current distribution of money. So I see a lot of really interesting future potential in ITMO, as not just as we pay you for the results and we take the result and we forget about it, but that result actually becoming a value in and of itself.
Yeah.
That we might even use for exchange and for, yeah.
Yeah. You know, and to link it maybe to the kind of work around money that I actually do, because the technicality of it is always what I'm not an expert for that. There are people like you and other people who know, a million times more about this. But what I keep observing is there is something about our very, very personal relationship to money. If we disentangle that, we are much more creative in coming up with the solutions that could work in the future. Like, for example, what you just described.
Yeah. So one of the really interesting properties of the ITMO is that it's not fully fungible. Like every of these credits comes with some kind of story. So one is from a school in Uganda, another one is from a health clinic in a small island state. They're more like memorial coins of our struggle with climate change than just this anonymous slip of that our traditional money is. So this is also something I found echoed in Graeber's work, that there's just periods of time where people use different kind of values, and sometimes the value of a story is much higher than the value of a pure accounting unit. And in other times in history, the accounting unit is what rules and the stories get lost. So maybe there's also even a shift that we don't trade just CO2 tons, but we say, hey, I have this really interesting ton. Or I have this kind of land ton, but would you still take it? So it's a very curious future if you think through carbon like reduction certificates from the lens. Is this money? Could this be money? What effects would it have if that has money? So yeah, that's future work for me also to hash that out in more detail. But I'm super excited about, like, this is weird and it's somehow real because it's like Paris Agreement and we are about to create these units. Like there isn't a single Paris climate carbon credit yet. The first ones are about to come this year or next year. So it's like very like, oh, okay, what's happening here? And
a whole new realm of conversation. So
to close this off.
Yeah, exactly. To be continued.
Our investment pitch for the situation in Ghana is, you give us Swiss francs, we give you ITMOs. So it's a very clean deal. You only get these carbon credits back, nothing else. There's no debt created for Ghana. That's also really important for me. Don't want any debt to be created for African countries anymore. There's too much going wrong with that way of international relation. So we pay for the schools. They give us these new currency back, and we'll see what to do with it. We can either sell it to the oil industry for traditional currency or do something else with it. We'll find out along the way. So yeah.
Wow.
I
wish you all the best of luck with the exciting new stage of that project and what else will come of it. And Tim, thank you so much for this really inspirational conversation.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. This was a great discussion. So
yeah, and maybe just as a side note for everybody who's listening, because we're two Germans having a conversation in English, that was a deliberate choice, because I figured, Tim, that the message you have and the ideas you have are worthwhile sharing to a larger audience. And therefore, I think we have the potential of reaching more people in this language. So thank you for also together with me stumbling along in a language that is not completely ours, but I think we get the point across.
Danke dir, Nadja. Es ist auch Englisch ist einfach meine professionelle Sprache und sobald ich über das Pariser Abkommen spreche, kommt es einfach auf Englisch. Ich kann gar nicht drüber nachdenken auf Deutsch. Das ist, ja, ist einfacher so.
Genau, super. Tim, ich danke dir.
Okay, bye.
Bye.